Hello and welcome to this great session on VMware Zero Carbon Committed. My name is Nicola Akert and I'm Vice President for Environment and Social Governance here at VMware in the Office of the CTO. Today, we'll be talking about connecting customers to cloud partners with aligned sustainability goals. Before we do, a quick disclaimer from our hosts. Thank you. So to our agenda. In this session, we will first of all set the stage for why running zero carbon data centers is becoming table stakes among public cloud providers. We'll provide a quick overview of VMware's recently launched Zero Carbon Committed initiative. And finally, we'll hear from an expert panel of our cloud provider partners who are at the forefront leading the charge for a zero carbon cloud ecosystem. And at the end of our time together, we hope that you will have a good grounding in the why, the what, and the how of sustainable cloud service. And most importantly, be inspired to join us on this critical mission. So let's start with the why. Why are cloud providers setting a target to power their data center operations with renewable energy? Well, first, there's the science. And for those who follow the data, the most recent United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report was frankly quite dire. In the bottom line, we have less than a decade to cut carbon emissions in half to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. And that said, we are seeing unprecedented numbers of companies, governments, and investors responding to that challenge. What's more is that there are any number of economic reports that are speaking to the market, both the market demand and opportunity to address this macro challenge of climate. And specific to cloud computing, research firm Aberdeen recently published a report that concluded that businesses with zero carbon commitments are much more likely to have optimized their infrastructure, reduced costs, and have higher satisfaction amongst management. So what this points to is that companies are looking for technology vendor partners that share their sustainability commitments. Because if they partner with a cloud provider that hasn't made the same commitment to being green or carbon neutral or even carbon negative, their organizations will have a hard time meeting their goals. But don't take my word for it. A recent report from Accenture found that sustainable cloud was identified as one of the top cloud trends among 25. And 44% of the CEOs that were surveyed stated that they are or they're planning to set net zero goals for their organization. And that includes, and here's the key point for us, the decarbonization benefits to their organization from leveraging cloud. And similarly, another recent report from 541 Research found that the majority of cloud providers actually agree that sustainability is a strong competitive differentiator for them, both now and increasingly so in the future. And what's important, I think, to understand about these trends is that companies are now setting decarbonization goals not only for their internal operations, but also for their supply chain operations. And one of the most credible indicators of the secular shift is the commitment to science-based targets, which is in essence a commitment to reducing carbon emissions of an organization's operations and supply chain to zero by 2050. Make no mistake, this is a difficult goal to achieve. And so with that, it's a big signal today that more than 1,700 companies have made the commitment to science-based targets. And what this means is that they're also looking for solutions. So suppliers, including technology vendors and partners that can help these companies achieve their sustainability goals, will have an advantage as the market moves. This is one of my favorite slides, and perhaps folks in the audience today, you recognize some of these logos, or maybe you work for one of these companies. And this is just a small subset of the more than 1,700 companies that have set science-based targets. And as you'll note, right, these are global cross-sector companies, and they're also important customers to most of us. And here's the good news. We can help them achieve their sustainability goals. How? Well, that's exactly what we're going to discuss with our panel today. But before we launch into the panel discussion, let me give you a quick overview of VMware's Zero Carbon Committed Initiative. So this was born out of the recognition that of the value, honestly, of VMware's cross-cloud platform, and therefore the enormous opportunity together to accelerate the decarbonization of digital infrastructure through our public cloud partner ecosystem. And this is really a better together story. And so what is it exactly? This program we created is focused on our public cloud providers with a shared vision that by 2030, all VMware public clouds will be zero carbon through energy efficiency and 100% renewable energy powered data centers. And the goal here, as I said, is really to accelerate this transition to zero carbon clouds around the world by firstly running VMware clouds in 100% renewable energy powered data centers, connecting customers to partners with aligned sustainability goals, enabling what I call co-opetition and differentiation in the ecosystem, and ultimately inspiring more cloud partners to adopt renewable energy goals and to implement cloud-verified software-defined data centers. So to start, we've created a customer provider portal that makes it easy for customers to find cloud providers that meet their business and sustainability needs. And since we launched in May, I'm really proud that we've signed on 20 partners so far. And maybe you're asking, well, what's in it for me? What's the value proposition to partners here? And it really includes three key things. First of all, leveraging the zero carbon committed branding as a competitive differentiator. Secondly, it's about access to a large pipeline of engaged customers who have decarbonization goals and supply chain sustainability requirements or commitments. And then thirdly, providing an enhancing promotion through forums like VMworld, social media, blogs, white papers, and the broader VMware ecosystem. And that's in addition to the promotional activities that you already have available through the Cloud Verified program. So what does it take to be part of this? Well, just really quickly, the first is a minimum of at least one Cloud Verified data center running the full virtualization stack of compute, storage, and network working. And being Cloud Verified is a prerequisite because we know that already improves energy and carbon efficiency of your data center infrastructure. And then secondly, a commitment to operate your public cloud data centers using 100% renewable energy by 2030. And you'll notice the 2030 is an aspiration here and a commitment that we all share. So if you're interested, we would love to hear from you. And so please reach out to the team and we'd be happy to discuss that further. So with that, now let's turn to our expert panel and dive into the why, the what, and the how of sustainable cloud services. I'm thrilled to welcome Brian Janis from Microsoft. Brian is the GM for Energy and Renewables at Microsoft, along with Chris Talbot. Chris is Google's Cloud Sustainability Lead, and Jennifer Ruck from Equinix, and Jennifer is the Director of Sustainability at Equinix. Welcome to you all. Let's dive in. So first of all, you all have fascinating roles at your respective companies. So rather than me reading off your bio, let's, by way of introduction, I'd love to hear from each of you, and would like to ask you to share with the audience what it is that you do. What is your day job? And then also share with us what are the commitments that your company has made, and what's the driving force behind those commitments. So perhaps let's start with you, Jennifer.
Great. Thanks, Nicola. Thanks for having me. As Nicola said, my name is Jennifer Brook. I am the Director of Sustainability at Equinix. Equinix is the world's digital infrastructure company. We build, own, and operate over 225 data centers in 26 countries. And my role at Equinix is really to drive our leadership strategy around ESG at the company. And that includes our annual sustainability reporting and all of our engagement with our investors, customers, employees, and our stakeholders globally. So for Equinix, our key priority is really to reach our 100% renewable energy goal. And that goal was set in 2015 when we were the first data center company to announce such a goal. Secondly, we recently set our science-based target. And as Nicola mentioned, Science-Based Targets Initiative is really driving companies to progress on climate change and emission reduction targets, where the world is falling short of reaching these targets. So we have an SBTI or SBT at Equinix that encompasses both our scope 1 and 2, as well as our value chain and our scope 3. And as part of this commitment, we further agreed that we would reduce our emissions in scope 2 and 1 to net zero or globally climate neutral by 2030. So my role at Equinix is really to drive the execution and the initiatives that we will need to reach these goals in the next 10 years.
Thank you, Jennifer. Let's turn to Chris. Chris.
Thanks, Nicola, and hi, everyone. It's great to be here with you. Like Nicola mentioned, I'm a cloud sustainability lead at Google. So the really interesting part about my role is I get to work with hundreds of customers and basically help them understand the things that Google's doing that could potentially help them become more sustainable. But probably more interestingly, talk with their sustainability teams and bring their sustainability and technical teams together to hopefully use cloud technology in a way that could help them make their business more sustainable. And it's an incredible opportunity, largely due to what Google has been doing for a long time in the sustainability space. So sustainability has been part of the company since our founding, and we've been a carbon neutral company since 2007. But because our business is the business of operating large data centers and digital services throughout the globe, we use a lot of electricity. So many of our commitments in the past and into the future are around a transition to carbon-free energy. So since 2017, we've actually procured enough renewable energy on a global and annual basis to meet all of the electricity that goes into powering services like Gmail or Google Cloud services. But just last year, we sort of set the bar a bit higher. And by 2030, we hope to actually run on carbon-free energy in every location throughout the globe, 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. And we believe that if you could do that at Google's scale, we can sort of prove that large-scale decarbonization of electricity is possible. So I get a great opportunity to take this message to our customers and hopefully help them use our technology to become carbon-free as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. Brian.
Thanks, Nicola. So I'm Brian Janis, General Manager of Energy and Renewables at Microsoft. I oversee over 200 data centers across over 40 different countries and 60 different, over 60 cloud regions that Microsoft operates, and responsible for all of the energy sourcing and strategy, including our renewable energy procurement, which is a big part of our overall carbon and climate commitments, which are largely driven by our commitment to be carbon negative by 2030, and then ultimately by 2050 pay back our entire carbon debt since our founding in 1975. And so there's a lot of elements to that. It includes looking at our direct emissions, our scope 1, scope 2 emissions, which of course we're addressing through the purchase of renewable energy, but also our scope 3 as well. And so that's a big part of that commitment, which for us, and I think for most companies, is the largest part of their overall emissions. It's about 75% for us. And so we have a lot of work going on with our supply chains and, ultimately trying to squeeze as much carbon as we can out of that supply chain. And then eventually, really start looking to carbon removal. And so we've done, one of the larger procurements of carbon removal projects, both nature-based and engineered solutions in the last year, and we're continuing to accelerate that. And so that's all part of a overall commitment to address not just carbon, but also water and waste across our entire footprint. So we've got commitments around that as well to be water positive and zero waste by 2030, in addition to what we're doing in carbon.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. Well, thank you for those great introductions. Let's turn to the discussion now of the how, the what, and the why. And you all spoke about the work that you do and the commitments that your companies have made. And those are ambitious goals, really, really impressive. Can you speak a little bit to the why and the market demand that you're seeing? What are you hearing from your customers around the demand for these kinds of outcomes? Let's start, Jennifer, let's start with you.
Sure. I mean, I think we've been on a sustainability journey for a number of years. I've been at Equinix for 8.5 years, and it kind of started with some of our enterprise customers, consumer-facing brands coming to us, recognizing that the source of our electricity was a primary concern for them as they're setting their own carbon reduction goals. So we quickly recognized that in terms of materiality, addressing our electricity usage, reducing it, as well as transitioning to renewables was going to be top of mind for both our company from a leadership standpoint, but also for our 10,000 customers who, were in their global supply chains. So I think customers really initiated this, and now we see a lot more interest from investors around ESG disclosures and additional transparency around climate risk. So the conversation continues to grow, but really we want to help customers on their sustainability journeys. We want to help them access, obviously, our top-notch data center services and help with their digital transformations, but also do that in a sustainable way, in a way that helps them access renewable energy at a scale that they couldn't typically buy themselves.
Thank you. I'm curious about others' perspective on that, and any changes that you've seen in the market, and what direction you see this trend going. Maybe Brian, I have you jump in there.
Yeah, there's been a pretty major shift in the last probably 4 or 5 years in terms of just customer expectations, the expectation of what is the role of a corporation, not just as it relates to sustainability, but as it relates to all up. I mean, do we really only exist for the purpose of maximizing value for the shareholder, or are there other responsibilities that corporations have inside of society, inside of the civil society, that really caused us to have certain values that go over and above just the return on our capital? Mm-hmm. And I think sustainability is certainly one of those areas where, as you were noting earlier on one of your slides, a lot of companies have really stepped up to set varying degrees of commitments, some of them very ambitious, I think represented by a lot of the companies on this panel, some not quite as ambitious as they probably need to be yet, but we're getting there, which is great. But just the fact that it's really become a common course for companies to make sustainability commitments, to be more transparent about their emissions. Obviously, the SEC is stepping in that as well. And so, we're getting, I think, better coordination between business and governments, acknowledging that, yeah, this is an issue. We all have a part to play. It's not just individual action. It's not just corporate action. It's not just, federal or state or policy action, but all of those are necessary. And so I'm very optimistic, given sort of where we are today, that the next decade is going to be pretty significant in terms of the progress that we make.
Absolutely. I think that your comment about that, it's not just coming from one place. There is multiple forces at play here. Chris, I'm curious from your perspective, what you've seen or changes in the conversations that you have with your customers. Is there something there that you're picking up? What are you hearing from the customer side?
Yeah, I think similar to what we've heard in some of your slides at the beginning of this presentation, the demand for sustainable cloud services, and probably more generally for tackling the climate change challenges associated with businesses across industries, has accelerated incredibly in the past couple of years. Every once in a while, we take a pulse on our customers, the developers out there on Google Cloud. And we partnered with IDG to do some recent research in this particular space and ask questions about sort of what are the sustainability trends when it comes to making IT decisions or infrastructure decisions or application development decisions. And I think perhaps not surprisingly, given the overall urgency and attention to climate change, 90% of the respondents viewed sustainability as a priority for their IT department. But only 67% of the respondents had targets actually in place. So I think one of the things that we're focused on at Google Cloud is, hopefully supporting these folks with the data, the insights, the tools that they need to actually take some real immediate action today. And we expect that work with our customers and probably many of the folks out there on this presentation right now, providing them with the tools that they can actually take actions to set targets and reduce the environmental impact of cloud services or IT services.
I think that's first of all, fascinating research. I think that's, and again, another data point that's beyond a shadow of a doubt around these trends. You also raised, I think, an important point, Chris, around the challenge of going from aspiration to action. So maybe I could ask the panelists, again, you've all been at the bleeding edge of this. Let's turn to the question of how, and from your experience, how you've gone about it within your respective companies and some of the lessons that you've learned on that journey. So I don't know, anyone want to take that, the sort of the how, what challenges have you faced in setting targets and driving results?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in on that. I think for Microsoft, I think for most companies, it's always a journey and an evolution, right? You don't start out day one, with your most ambitious commitments, right? I mean, it's always going to be incremental, starting to learn and understand and peel back that onion. And for us, it started in 2012 with committing to be carbon neutral. We later then committed to be 100% renewable, taking more responsibility for the development of net new resources, bringing in concepts like additionality. Then we added, our entire supply chain and looking across not just our electricity, but also other aspects of our business. And then ultimately, most recently, committing to ensuring that we have, 100%, carbon-free energy 100% of the time by 2030. And so, and I'm sure next year there will be something else, right? It's always, there's always that pressure, once you make one commitment, then you learn some more things about what the art of the possible is. And so, I think we're far from our last sort of, line in the sand that we're going to draw about where we're going, because we're going to learn things along the way, and what we can achieve. And so, yeah, I would say the most important thing is start somewhere, start setting some goals and setting some boundaries and make them very near term, because, you need to do something that really elicits action and response right away, rather than setting something so far away that no one who sets the goal or is responsible for it will actually be there when you achieve it.
Yeah, right. I think, just starting somewhere is, I think, a great message, right? It doesn't have to be perfect, and we are all in this together in a journey. What's important is a goal. I think we all live by that adage of, having a goal and being measured against it is one way of getting a focus on outcomes. Curious about others. Chris and Jennifer, insights into, for the audience in, how you've gone about this, getting from, that aspiration and to action, and any, low-hanging fruit or things that you've, recommend for the audience here.
Yeah, I would definitely agree that don't let perfect be the enemy of good. It's good to start somewhere. Measurement is a good place to start. Putting together a passionate group of individuals who are going to undertake something like a sustainability materiality assessment, create your first sustainability report, start measuring, where your most material, environmental, social, and governance impacts are. And then from there, it's kind of an educational kind of journey, partnering with organizations like REBA, the Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance, of which we're all members of. Is really, pre-COVID, it was a great learning opportunity to be in the same room with other people that were on this journey together, whether it was learning about how to buy renewables in a particular market or how to make claims on, your greenhouse gas inventory. All of those things, you can read about them online, but it's really great to partner with, like-minded organizations.
Absolutely. And speaking of REBA, the Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance, I'm reminded as we're speaking about the challenges and frankly also some of the skepticism. So maybe we can just talk about that just directly. I think there is a lot of skepticism around these grand claims that companies are making around net zero and carbon neutrality or being carbon negative. I'm curious, maybe folks can speak about this perception perhaps that, a lot of companies are buying renewable energy credits, that these are in essence, companies are buying their way out of the problem. Curious your thoughts on that, or someone want to address the elephant in the room question?
No, I'll jump in on that for sure. So I think there's different degrees at which companies can engage in this space, and there is obviously the mechanism of simply buying credits from existing projects, and that's where this concept of additionality comes in, right? Is the action of the buyer in any way sort of triggering a net reduction in carbon, right? I mean, that's really the important question. Is how are we leveraging our buying power and our engagement in the market to ensure that the total carbon emitted on the grid is in fact lower than it was before? That's really the important thing. And I think people get a little distracted by this notion of power, where the power is being delivered, and the power coming into your meter. The fact of the matter is, carbon is not emitted at the point of use. You don't emit carbon when you use electricity. It's emitted when you generate it. So the important thing is, as a buyer, are you changing the sources of generation on the grid? And the way that we typically do that is through power purchase agreements, right? Those agreements provide the financial backing that ensure that net new projects are built, and almost by definition, those projects will displace some amount of carbon-based resources on the grid. And so that's really the important measure for us is, and going even farther, we've done some work with Resurety on this to look at not just the fact that you're putting a megawatt hour of zero carbon energy on the grid, but what specifically are you displacing? So bringing in a concept of locational marginal emissions that says, where you put that project is actually really important too. And there's parts of the grid where you can put a new, renewable project where you're not going to be displacing much carbon because there may already be a lot of renewables in that region. So I think over the last 10 years, that concept was maybe not that important because just doing anything was important, right? We were just trying to start to build, from close to zero, in terms of the amount of renewable energy we had on the grid to where we are today, which has been a significant increase in the last 10 years. But as we start thinking about, as Chris was alluding to, truly decarbonizing the grid, we have to bring more intelligence into it. And we have to actually start thinking about how do we start to move from 10% to 50% to 80% to 100%.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That really is the ultimate challenge. Chris, maybe you can jump in here. I'm curious your perspective on this, and particularly around the work you've done around 24/7, and your thoughts of where this is going and what needs to happen.
Yeah, maybe I can provide a little bit of a layer of sort of how we have this conversation with our customers, because it's a good question to ask, right? If you're considering, should I shut down this data center? Should I look into renewable energy procurement? Should I migrate this workload versus the next? So I think, one of the things that we make sure that happens in the conversations with our customer is that sustainability and technical and engineering teams are talking to each other at the outset of these sort of projects. And that enables you to have that conversation about, okay, what are our goals? Is this a net zero goal? Are we looking at offsets? Are we looking at fully decarbonizing our operations? And that can provide some context and basically get to a key performance indicator for the decisions that you might be facing as an IT leader or a developer, right? And make sure that you're pursuing actions that will ultimately translate into positive impact against your particular sustainability goal. Because as you heard from all three of us on this panel, organizations are, they're unique in their operations, so they're setting sustainability goals that are unique to them. So I think that's one of the suggestions that we make with our customers, is make sure that that conversation is happening. And then, I think one of the ways that we make sure that we're, very science-based in our approach, and we're actually contributing to real carbon emission reductions in, the actions that we're supporting our customers with, is, we try to distill all of our conversations down to the carbon emissions associated with that particular action, right? Whether it's choose one region versus the next to migrate your workload to, or it's to choose serverless versus steady state sort of workloads or products to support your business. Making sure that you sort of distill those conversations down into carbon emissions, and then you can start to price that basically into the decisions that you would similar to cost benefits or resiliency benefits or performance benefits. Carbon benefits should actually be in that conversation as well.
Mm-hmm. Of course, speaking to the choir here, I think getting to a point where carbon is included in that pricing and decision making, I think is really the holy grail of flipping the business case. So I'm curious, where you see needs to happen to get there. Thoughts on the challenges to get there, or is it happening already? Do you see customers asking for that?
I mean, I can speak for Equinix. I think we're in a slightly different market space in that our customers definitely run the gamut in terms of their understanding of even whether they understand that moving in a multi-tenant data center is going to give them improvement in efficiency. So sometimes we have to meet customers where they are, and many of them are earlier in their sustainability journeys. So just explaining that we buy renewable energy, it has this, multiple effect, because we're not just buying it for their cage, we're buying it for 100 customers underneath one roof across, many different countries, and helping them understand how that translates into their sustainability reporting requirements. Sometimes is really just the first step before we even get down to that 24/7 product that Chris has mentioned, which would be, the gold standard for a sophisticated customer wanting to move workloads around. So I think it's depending on the customer. I have conversations with various customers throughout the day, and they can range in their knowledge of how even moving to Equinix could benefit them in general. So it's a continuous learning approach, I think, and educating customers and working with them.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Jennifer, around really meeting people where they are, and that menu of options to start down this path. So kind of along that track, I'm curious about best practices, and from your experience, all of you, and particularly around there's the renewable energy piece of the puzzle here, and then there's the operational piece, and maybe we can cover both of those. Any thoughts on kind of best practices in going out and starting that journey of purchasing renewable energy, given everything the caveats we just discussed, Brian, your points about the market and additionality and all of that. So let's start with that, and then I really want to come to this question of operational efficiency and other best practices you can share with the audience. Anyone want to tackle the first one?
Sure. I mean, on the best practices piece, I mean, it's largely going to be a function of scale, right? And what are the nature of your operations? Data centers are somewhat unique in that we have very large loads concentrated, in single locations and single regions. We're very different than, say, a Walmart or someone like that who's got much more distributed loads across thousands of facilities. And so just getting an understanding of really what am I trying to accomplish? What are the goals? Do we have particular renewable energy targets that we want to hit by region? Are we looking at it on a net annual global basis? And depending on the nature of your load, that may get answered for you. You're not going to be able to necessarily, if you're operating in hundreds of different locations around the world, you may have to think differently about how you go about procuring renewable energy and what that really means. So really just understanding your needs, and then what are the market dynamics that exist in those regions. And so I don't think there is a one size fits all approach to this, and I don't think that every company should try to emulate a Microsoft or Google or Equinix either. We have particular types of loads that inform how we think about this issue, and it's important for each customer to think about that. Whether they can do something like going out and buying renewable energy via PPAs, or maybe it's a better fit to work directly with a utility via a green tariff or something of that nature.
Mm-hmm. I think that's great advice. Really, really great advice.
And there's certainly a geographic element of I think Equinix, we have to operate in certain metros because we're low latency, high performance kind of sites. You might have a more flexibility in where you can be located. So you can be looking at the grids in a completely different lens than we might be looking at it. So I think you have to consider what you're trying to solve for and where.
Mm-hmm. That's another great point. Chris, I wonder if I can ask you about, from an operations perspective and from taking into account also the energy efficiency side of the equation, from an IT operations perspective, what your thoughts there are around best practice.
Yeah, so I I alluded to sort of the first two that I think we would recommend in sort of work with our customers, right? Have this engineering sustainability dialogue, target a key performance indicator that helps you assess decisions against that. I think sort of the third best practice, if you will, that we're finding some success with is actually price some of these decisions, price ESG impact in a way that helps you apply consistency across the decision-making criteria that you're evaluating. One of the ways we do that is to actually bring the social cost of carbon into ROI models for data center transitions or migrations. And then maybe getting to best practice 4 and not creating more unsustainable debt for yourself, I think gets to some of those efficiency conversations, right? A lot of the decisions that you would naturally make in optimizing your workload for the cloud or just for performance or efficiency can also help from a sustainability perspective, right? Not creating idle resources when you don't have to, or reserved instances, using virtualization, which will increase efficiency, perhaps serverless products that can sort of scale elastically with your demand. And then, in a lot of our research, one of the most important factors is actually the location of that workload. And, that comes with many considerations around data sovereignty or residency. But for a lot of the customers we talk to, there actually is some flexibility to, follow the carbon intensity of the grid in where they're locating their workloads. And then perhaps to close, I think on this best practice conversation, consider the magic moment, if you will, for, the different types of audiences that you have. So to give you kind of an example, in the developer world, we present some of the users of our products with green icons for greener regions where they can place their resources. And when we looked at implementing the solution, we actually saw that just by presenting these sort of green icons for clean regions, a new user was 50% more likely to make that choice versus an alternative. So, giving your users or your decision makers the data that they need to make a decision in the moment that they need to make it can be really influential from a sustainability perspective.
Mm-hmm. I love that idea, the magic moment, and the kind of there's that human dimension, right? So there's the technical piece of what the levers are that we can pull to get to these outcomes, but then there's that human sort of cultural piece as well. And I'm so glad you brought that up. And maybe along those lines, we can shift to a question around prioritization. And I think this is the combination of the economics and the trade-offs, and then the options, and making these investments. So I think if we're honest, a lot of people worry about the cost of implementing sustainability solutions on cloud, to address this challenge, right? So, Chris, you mentioned, including the social cost of carbon in some of those models. But I'm curious what the conversations are like, and then if there's any stories or any insights you can share again with the audience around, when the rubber hits the road and it comes down to the, prioritizing sustainability investments, things that you've seen that really help to move things along. Do people worry? Do you get that conversation about the trade-off?
I would say that is certainly a conversation that we've had, but it's also about really what are the core values of the organization. When I think about this issue of sustainability, for us, I always liken it to something like customer data privacy and security. We don't really talk about the cost of keeping our customer data secure, right? That's not like there's a debate that's going on. It's like, well, is it really worth it for us to spend money on that? Well, of course, we're going to spend money on that. And I think sustainability is much the same for us. It's part of our core values. And so, we really look at it more along the lines of what are the right things for us to do as a company? What are the things we need to commit to? And then let's go figure out a way to do those as cost effectively as possible. We certainly don't get a blank check for this stuff. Right? I mean, we are certainly challenged to be innovative and to think creatively about how we go solve these problems. But when you're talking about a problem, as significant as climate change, it's really not a question of whether we're going to go solve it. It's just a question of how and how fast we can do it. And so that's where, for us, it's not to say that we don't pay attention to the cost, because we absolutely do. But it's also a non-negotiable for us. So it's a question of not if we're going to do it, but how. Mm-hmm.
Perhaps applying a layer of, how do you justify a technical project that wants to prioritize sustainability? I think, including that social cost of carbon, of course, makes the sort of cost justification better. But I think more holistically, kind of a bit of what Brian was getting to is that, customers that they work with, they understand that their brand and their organization needs to stand for sustainability, and that has an economic benefit as well, right? The choices that some of our customers make to, perhaps reduce their environmental footprint by working with Google Cloud, the folks like Etsy or Shopify or Spotify, it's, because it aligns with their brand ethos, but also because they recognize that it's important to them to provide a carbon neutral platform to their own customers, right? They know that the listeners of Spotify would appreciate that Spotify is operating their platform in a carbon neutral way. Same thing for all of the creators that use, the Etsy platform to distribute their goods. So I think, we see the benefit in sort of, less tangible or perhaps downstream ways to making some of these decisions from an IT perspective to operate more sustainably. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's valuable, great insight. Thank you for sharing that perspective. And I think that you're all pointing to, when we started this conversation, that there are multiple dimensions to the work here. At the end of the day, it's both about driving value, broadly defined, and getting to outcomes and making tangible progress in these commitments that companies are making for all of us. Jennifer.
Yeah, I would also add there's an investor element to sustainability. And of course, we also don't get a blank check. But as we're looking at driving sustainable value, there's definitely an increase in appetite from the investment community in investing in sustainable businesses and companies that align with some of the existing and upcoming regulations, such as the EU Sustainable Finance taxonomy. So I think that's important to recognize that it's driving sustainable value for your operations, but also for your company at large. And Equinix was able to take advantage of this in the last year. We issued $3.7 billion of green bonds. I know Google also did a couple of large tranches last year. And this just showcases that there's huge investor appetite to, invest in companies that are driving sustainable change, whether it's building operations, renewable energy at scale, energy efficiency, and a whole host of other areas that we're all driving toward.
Yeah, that's another great point, Jennifer. Thank you for bringing that up. And I think across the board, right, to your comment, there is the appetite for sustainable investments, and in the intersection that we're now seeing between sustainability, climate imperative, along with infrastructure transformation, and then of course, the digital transformation that is underpinning all of this. So much of what we all are doing, right, and supporting our respective customers is at that nexus of many of these forces. I will say this conversation is fascinating. I could talk until the cows come home with all of you about the things that you're doing, learning, the leading edge innovations that you're driving. And I know we have just a few more minutes here. So I'd love to maybe wrap up with a question for each of you. And that's simply this, the one piece of advice question. If there was one thing that you could impart to the audience with us today, what would that be?
I think I would just say, think big about what it is that you and your company can achieve. I think one of the things as I look back over time is that we've never been sort of disappointed by making an ambitious commitment that we didn't quite know at the time how we were going to achieve. In fact, what we found is that we've actually done more than we thought we could do, and then we end up sort of moving the bar in on ourselves. Sometimes to the chagrin of those of us who have to go execute these things, when our executives say, well, why don't we do that 5 years sooner? Or why don't we go much bigger? But that goes back to the point I was making about, I think the overall sort of zeitgeist today, across a number of different companies is, hey, this is an important issue, and it's something that corporations have responsibility for, and therefore we should be making ambitious commitments. We should be challenging ourselves and challenging one another to go bigger and to go faster as it relates to our climate commitments.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better.
Yeah, and I would echo that. Think big and think strategically about the topics that your company can uniquely impact, and then also find good partners. Of course, it's always a journey. Sustainability is something that we're all learning as we go, and every day something new comes out, and that's exciting, especially on the innovation front. I think you'll see a lot of new things coming up in the data center sector on how we're going to reduce energy usage and improve our emissions profiles. Of course, operations and supply chain as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So in it together, right? Yeah.
And for the IT leaders, the infrastructure managers, the application developers out there, I'd say, give sustainability considerations a seat at the table. I think we all know that, as the world becomes increasingly digital, there's lots of considerations. It feels like cognitive overload, right? When you think about security and performance and data sovereignty and all of those things. But I think there's a lot of value and a lot of positive impact. And honestly, there's a lot of urgency around us, considering sustainability just like we would consider those things. And that, apps of the future should not only be, fast and secure and resilient, but they should also be sustainable. So I'd say give it a chance in your typical considerations.
That's great advice. And again, really inspiring and important. So, with that, I'm really grateful. Thank you, Brian, Jennifer, Chris, for your thoughts. I think, you really hit the key points around the why, the what, and the how. So, to wrap up here, in your words, right? Think big. This is the challenge of our times, and we're in it together. There are opportunities. Innovation is all about, addressing constraints and coming up with better ways of solving problems. And, as Jennifer said, think strategically. We can't do it all, but we can have an outsized impact based on what we know best. Find good partners, do it. And then the point about, Chris, I love this concept of cognitive overload. I feel like that every day, but in a positive way, right? All of these things are actually coming together, and there is an urgency. So, from the panelists to you all, invite your sustainability teams to the table, because together we really can innovate for the future. So, thank you all for your time. I hope that this was valuable and you leave with at least a good perspective, insights to go forth and join us on this mission and together make an impact. So with that, we'll close the session. And of course, I wouldn't be doing my duty as a moderator if I didn't remind you all to please complete the survey and enjoy the rest of VMworld. Thank you, everyone.